I was halfway through a sandwich when I got the knock that started it all, 3 sharp raps. No doorbell. Just the kind of knock that says, "I'm here to ruin your day." I opened the door to find a woman in her late 50s, hair teased into a helmet of curls, clipboard in hand, and a floral blouse that screamed HOA board member. "Mr. Bryson Vance?" she asked, as if she hadn't been watching me mow my lawn for the past 6 months. "Yeah," she adjusted her oversized sunglasses. "I'm Miranda Teller, president of the Sycamore Trails HOA. We need to talk about your outstanding dues." I blinked. "What dues?" She flipped a page. "You inherited Lot 62 from your uncle, correct?" "Yeah." "Then you owe $50,000 in back HOA fees, accumulated over the last 20 years, plus interest." I choked on my own spit. "I don't live in your HOA." "Well, your land is within our community boundaries. You're subject to our covenants, conditions, and restrictions." She smiled like it was a gift. "You sure?" "Because my uncle never paid a dime to anybody. And I've got the deed." She tapped her pen against the clipboard. "You'll want to settle this quickly, otherwise we'll have no choice but to place a lien on the property." I shut the door in her face. That night, I pulled out the land records my uncle had left in his safe. He was a surveyor by trade, knew land like most people know their own address. The deed was clear, 1 full acre unencumbered outside all HOA jurisdiction, but something caught my eye: the plat map. It showed the HOA's clubhouse, pool, and 4 homes overlapping my uncle's property line by a good 50 yards. I stared at the map, then out the window at the HOA's fancy clubhouse, just on the other side of the fence. They had built their entire community center and part of their neighborhood on land they didn't own. And now they were demanding I pay them $50,000. I made photocopies of everything, then drove down to the county records office the next morning. The clerk verified it my deed was clean, and no HOA was ever registered to govern my lot. What's more, the county map still recognized that 1 acre plot as outside all subdivision boundaries. Somehow, the HOA had just expanded around it. By the 3rd day, I got an official-looking envelope in the mail. Certified. Inside, a formal demand letter from the HOA's attorney: pay the $50,000 or they'd file a lien. I went straight to a real estate attorney named Carla Gray, a sharp-tongued woman who used to work for the county's zoning board. She took one glance at the documents and said, "These people are screwed." Carla filed a cease and desist against the HOA and prepared a quiet title action to prove ownership of the land. That's when Miranda came back, this time with 2 board members and a smug little grin. "You've made a mistake," she said. I pointed to the orange flags I'd set up to mark the true boundaries of my acre. 1 flag was planted right in the middle of their HOA pool deck. "No," I said. "You did." "I think you might want to call a surveyor," I said, motioning toward the boundary markers. Miranda didn't even glance at them. She kept her gaze locked on me, like she expected me to fold under pressure. The man beside her, tall, with a stiff jaw and a golf shirt tucked meticulously into his khakis, leaned in. "That clubhouse has been there for 15 years, he said. "You're not going to just change history." I folded my arms. "Then I guess you've been trespassing for 15 years. The 3rd board member, a younger woman with a Bluetooth headset still in her ear, muttered something under her breath and pulled out her phone. Probably texting their attorney or worse, trying to dig for dirt. They left without another word. But by the next morning, someone had ripped all my property flags out of the ground. Carla wasn't surprised. Classic intimidation tactic: "Don't worry, we documented everything. Let them dig their own hole." The quiet title suit moved forward fast because the evidence was ironclad. Carla had pulled archived land surveys, tax records, and even an old zoning proposal from when the HOA was first developed. None of it showed my uncle's acre being included in their territory. But what really put the nail in their coffin were the permits, or rather, the absence of them. The HOA had never filed the proper permits to build the clubhouse or pool. County code required a site inspection and sign-off for any shared-use structures. The paperwork simply didn't exist. Somehow, they'd managed to bypass the system, probably thanks to a now-retired city inspector who'd signed off on everything with a rubber stamp and an eye closed. Carla dropped that little detail into the court filings like a match into a dry field. The county took notice. Fast. 2 days later, a compliance officer showed up at the HOA's clubhouse with a clipboard and a camera. I watched from my porch as he snapped photos of the pool, the clubhouse foundation, and the tennis courts, all built well inside the boundaries of my deeded property. The board tried to stop him, of course, but he had a court order, and a sheriff's deputy standing right beside him. That night, I heard shouting across the street. The HOA had called an emergency board meeting in the clubhouse. People were pacing in the parking lot, phones pressed to ears, whispering in tight circles. I didn't need to be there to know they were panicking. The next morning, a new letter arrived. This time, it was an offer of resolution. They wanted to settle the matter amicably by waiving the alleged fees and offering a one-time payment of $8,000 for a perpetual easement to use the land under their clubhouse. I handed it to Carla. "They're admitting fault without saying it," she said. "Too little, too late." She countered with a formal demand: full removal of all structures on the property, back rent for unauthorized use spanning 2 decades, and compensation for legal costs. If they refused, we'd proceed with a full title enforcement action and a lawsuit for trespass. The HOA declined. Predictably, they must have assumed they'd win in court on sheer audacity, but then things got worse for them. The county opened a formal investigation into the HOA's building practices. Turns out, the same inspector who'd let them slide on the clubhouse had also signed off on several homes that extended partway onto my land. 4 of them, to be exact. When the county sent notices to those homeowners, the panic spread like wildfire. Carla and I started getting calls from their personal attorneys asking if we'd consider selling the land under their homes. We didn't respond. Instead, we filed a motion to add those properties to the quiet title action. Meanwhile, the HOA tried to rally the neighborhood. They sent out letters accusing me of trying to destroy the community for personal gain. Someone plastered a flyer on my mailbox with my face photoshopped onto a wrecking ball. I took it down and installed a security camera that same afternoon. That weekend, someone threw eggs at my truck. I filed a police report. The officer who responded was polite, but clearly annoyed that neighborhood drama had escalated to vandalism. "We'll keep an eye out," he said. "But you might want to consider parking in the garage for a while." Carla forwarded the incident to the judge presiding over the case. It didn't help the HOA's image. The court date arrived 3 weeks later. Dressed in a gray suit that hadn't seen daylight since my uncle's funeral, I sat beside Carla while the HOA's attorney, a man who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else, fumbled through his opening statements. He argued that the HOA had operated in good faith, that the structures were long established, and that removing them would cause irreparable harm to the community. Carla stood up and handed the judge a stack of oversized maps, survey reports, and photographs. Then she spoke calm, precise, and devastating. "We are not here to discuss community aesthetics. We are here to establish the rightful ownership of land. My client's property rights have been violated for over 20 years. The HOA built illegally. They collected dues off property they didn't own. And they attempted to extort my client with false claims of jurisdiction." Then she handed over the kicker, a notarized statement from the retired inspector, who confessed to being pressured by the original HOA board to fast-track approvals without proper land verification. The judge's face didn't move much, but his eyes narrowed. By the second day of the hearing, the HOA's attorney stopped objecting. He just sat there, flipping through documents like he was trying to find an escape hatch. The judge ruled 2 days later. The HOA had no legal claim to any portion of my land. They were ordered to remove all structures built within my boundaries within 6 months. Additionally, they had to pay me damages for unauthorized use plenty to cover Carla's fees, plus enough left over for me to live mortgage-free for a long time. But the real blow came when the judge referred the case to the district attorney's office for further investigation. Because the inspector's statement hinted at more than just negligence, it hinted at conspiracy. The DA launched a probe into the HOA's founding board members, and within weeks, subpoenas were flying. Property values in Sycamore Trails began to slide. Residents turned on the board. Some even came over to apologize, including one of the homeowners whose property now straddled the boundary line. "I never knew," he said, shaking his head. "We trusted them." I nodded. So did everyone. He offered to buy the strip of land his back porch sat on. I told him to wait until the dust settled, because something told me the real reckoning was just beginning. The morning after the ruling, I stood on my porch with a mug of coffee and watched as a pair of surveyors, hired by the county, began marking off the sections of land the HOA now officially had no right to use. They worked in silence, placing small neon flags around the clubhouse, the tennis courts, and the rear patios of the 4 homes that extended onto my property. One of them nodded at me on his way back to the truck. "You planning to bulldoze it all?" he asked. I raised the mug. "Not yet." The truth was, I didn't know what I was going to do. Carla had warned me that things would get messy before they got better, and she wasn't wrong. I had no interest in kicking families out of their homes or flattening playgrounds, but I also wasn't going to let these people pretend nothing happened. The next wave hit 2 days later. A notice from a title insurance company landed in my mailbox, unsigned but clearly meant to intimidate. Title disputes affecting Sycamore Trails HOA may impact refinancing and future sales. A copy went to every homeowner in the subdivision. I didn't need to ask Carla who sent it. It was a pressure tactic, designed to turn the neighborhood into a mob and push me into settling for less. Instead, I forwarded it to the DA's office. The same investigator who'd started digging into the original permits called me that afternoon. "This just got bigger," he said. "You ever hear of a company called Bryson Development Group?" I hadn't. They built Sycamore Trails 23 years ago. Turns out they filed a forged land use affidavit showing your uncle's parcel as part of their development. It was never verified by the county because the approval came through on a temporary exception, one that expired before construction even began. I leaned against the kitchen counter. "You're saying they faked it, filed it, and then got their buddies on the planning commission to look the other way. Your uncle must have never realized, or maybe he did and just didn't care." That sounded about right. My uncle wasn't the type to start legal fights unless someone parked on his grass. "They're implicating the HOA too," the investigator continued. "Board members from the early years signed off on documents they had no authority to execute. Some of those signatures might be forged, and at least one notary's stamp was invalid." I let out a low whistle. "So this isn't just a civil issue anymore. It's criminal," he said. "And it's going to get loud." By the end of the week, subpoenas were delivered to 5 former board members and 2 employees of Bryson Development. One of them still lived in Sycamore Trails, in a house with a 3-car garage and a brand new luxury SUV parked out front. I watched from across the street as agents escorted him to a black sedan. The neighborhood was quieter after that. Then came the emergency HOA meeting. This time, they didn't bother with the clubhouse. It was now technically sitting on my land, and I'd locked the gates. Instead, they held it in a cul-de-sac, folding chairs arranged in a circle like some strange suburban tribunal. I showed up halfway through, not to speak, just to watch. One man stood near the front, speaking into a megaphone like he was rallying troops. "We need to band together and protect our homes. This is about community preservation." A woman near the back shouted, "What about protecting our property values?" "My realtor says I can't even list until this gets resolved." Someone else yelled. Why didn't anyone verify the land boundaries before building? Who screwed that up? No one had answers, just frustration, just fear. I turned to leave, but a voice called out, "Bryson." I stopped. The speaker was a middle-aged man with a clipboard and a faded HOA badge. I remembered seeing him at one of the earlier visits. He'd stayed mostly silent then. "If you're going to tear everything down, at least say it to our faces," he said. I walked back toward the group. "I never said I'd tear anything down, but I'm not going to pretend this didn't happen. Your board lied. They built on land they didn't own and tried to shake me down for money. That's not community, that's theft." He lowered the megaphone. "What do you want?" "I want the truth on record. And I want the people responsible held accountable. After that, we'll talk." They didn't like it. But they didn't argue. The DA's office moved fast. Within 2 weeks, charges were filed against 3 former board members for falsifying legal documents and 1 developer for real estate fraud. The county also began proceedings to revoke the HOA's charter pending further investigation. That hit harder than anything else. Without a charter, the HOA couldn't enforce rules, collect dues, or even hold elections. It was a body without authority. The neighborhood, for the first time in 2 decades, was free from their grasp. Carla looked over the paperwork with a dry chuckle. "You didn't just win your case, you dismantled their entire regime." Still, I wasn't looking to punish the innocent. I met with the 4 homeowners whose houses partially sat on my land. Each one had a different story. One was a retired fire captain who'd refinanced twice and was now stuck in legal limbo. Another was a single mother of 2 who'd bought the house after her divorce, unaware of the boundary issues. I offered each of them a long-term lease agreement for the sliver of land they occupied 25 years, $1 per year, renewable with mutual consent. It gave them legal security and gave me peace of mind. Word spread. People started waving when I walked outside. Someone left a 6-pack of local beer on my porch with a sticky note that just said, "Thanks for standing up for what's right." It wasn't all smooth. One homeowner tried to sue me for mental distress caused by the uncertainty. The case was tossed out in a week, but it reminded me how shaken people still were. I didn't blame them. They'd been lied to for years. A month after the charter was suspended, the county sent in a team to assess the clubhouse and pool for potential demolition. But before anything could happen, a group of residents approached me with a proposal. "Let us buy that section of the land from you," said the new acting president, a woman named Erica who'd never served under the previous board. "We'll form a community trust, run it ourselves, no HOA. No power games." It was a good offer. Fair market value, no strings, and they'd be responsible for restoring the structures to code. I thought about it for a few days, then agreed. The sale went through at the end of the quarter. I used the proceeds to renovate the house, my uncle's old place, turning the detached garage into a woodworking shop, something he'd always wanted to do but never got around to. The neighborhood slowly shed its old skin. The signs came down. The threats stopped. People talked at block parties instead of board meetings, and the clubhouse, it stayed. But now it had a new name, Sycamore Commons, open to everyone, run by volunteers, free to use. Carla visited one afternoon to drop off the final closing documents. She looked around at the quiet street, the kids playing near the corner, the neighbors chatting by their mailboxes. "You turned the whole place inside out," she said, "without bulldozing a single thing." I handed her a lemonade. "Just had to put the land back where it belonged," she laughed. "And remind everyone who it belonged to in the first place." I didn't need a plaque or a street named after me. I just wanted the truth to matter. And now, on this one little acre surrounded by the mess others made, it finally did. The first signs of real change weren't quiet, not this time. It started when a white van with the county seal pulled up to the old HOA office. 4 people in plain clothes stepped out, each with a canvas evidence bag and a clipboard. They didn't knock. They presented a warrant and walked straight in. When one of them emerged holding a dusty filing cabinet drawer in both hands, The few early dog walkers nearby stopped and stared. I was already outside, working on the bench in my new workshop when they arrived. I didn't need to ask what they were after. Carla had warned me this might happen once the DA's office turned over the financials to the state auditor. 2 hours later, a second van pulled up, this one unmarked, with a tall man in a navy suit stepping out. He walked with the purpose of someone on a tight clock. His name was Vince Darden, an assistant attorney general. Carla had told me he specialized in municipal corruption cases. The kind where HOA boards thought they were untouchable. This wasn't just about land anymore. I watched from behind the garage as they loaded boxes of financial records, receipts, flash drives, and even a desktop computer tower into the van. 2 board members stood nearby, one shaking his head, the other biting his thumbnail like it might stop the inevitable. Darden approached me after the team wrapped up. "Mr. Vance," he said, extending a hand. His grip was firm but not aggressive. "Thanks for making time." "I didn't," I said, "but I'm not stopping you either." He chuckled once. "Fair. We're looking into how this HOA processed dues, fines, and special assessments over the last 16 years. Preliminary findings suggest multiple counts of embezzlement, misappropriation of funds, and false tax filings. You think it's just the board?" He shook his head. "No. We think it started with the developer. The board just learned how to keep the machine running." I didn't ask what he meant. I wouldn't have to wait long to find out. By the following Thursday, it hit the local news. Not the tabloids, the real outlets. A joint statement from the Attorney General's office, and the state auditor confirmed that Sycamore Trails HOA had failed to report over $200,000 in collected fees. Roughly 70% of that had been transferred to personal accounts belonging to former board presidents and their relatives. At least one former secretary had used HOA funds to pay off a mortgage on a vacation home 3 states over. The broadcast aired at 6. By 7, 3 homes had for sale signs hammered into their front lawns. A week later, the state filed criminal charges against 6 individuals. 3 former board members, the original developer's son who had inherited the company, a former HOA accountant, and a private contractor who'd received over $50,000 in maintenance contracts for work that was never performed. Surveillance footage from the clubhouse's own security system showed him sunbathing by the pool on the days he was working. I didn't celebrate, not because I wasn't satisfied, but because I knew what came next. Panic. People who had paid dues religiously, many of whom had voted for those board members, were now faced with the realization that their money had disappeared. Some had refinanced their homes to pay off fines that weren't even legal to begin with. One neighbor, a father of 4, came by that evening, his hands buried in his hoodie pockets. "I don't know what to tell my wife," he said. "We paid $1,500 in landscaping violations last year. The grass was just long because we were out with a sick kid." "You tell her the truth," I told him. "You got conned. So did most of the neighborhood," he nodded slowly. "You think they'll get their money back eventually." But not from the HOA. A restitution fund was set up by the state 2 weeks later, seeded with seized assets from the indicted parties. The vacation home was sold. Cars were impounded. One of the ex-board members pleaded guilty in exchange for a reduced sentence and turned over a private bank account containing nearly $80,000. The HOA, as a legal entity, was dead. The county voted to formally dissolve it. The neighborhood would be reclassified as an unincorporated residential area, with governance reverting to county ordinances. It meant fewer restrictions, but also fewer services. Residents would now have to coordinate garbage pickup and street maintenance themselves. Some worried it would lead to chaos, but it didn't. Erica, the woman who'd helped broker the land purchase for the community trust, stepped up unofficially. A few others joined her. They weren't a board. They didn't write rules. They just coordinated volunteers and made sure things ran smoothly. They posted meeting times on the community bulletin outside the old clubhouse, now repurposed as a shared gathering space and library. I donated a few books, my uncle's old field journals among them. The county eventually sent in a contractor to remove the fence that had once marked the edge of my acre. It had been an ugly wrought iron thing installed by the HOA to mark where their domain ended. Now it didn't need to exist. Grass grew over the post holes within a month. One morning, Carla stopped by with a bottle of bourbon and 2 glasses. She wore jeans and a windbreaker, no briefcase in sight. "You've got a knack for turning chaos into something useful," she said, settling into the porch chair. "I didn't do it alone." "No," she said. "But you didn't flinch either." We clinked glasses. The bourbon was smooth and sharp. "I got a call from a reporter in Raleigh," she added. "They're doing a piece on predatory HOAs. Yours is going to be the centerpiece." I raised an eyebrow. "I'm not talking to a camera. They don't want you to. They want your documents, the ones your uncle left, the ones that proved everything." I thought about it for a second, then nodded. "They can have copies." She leaned back, satisfied. "Might stop the next HOA from trying something like this." 3 months passed. The neighborhood stabilized. Kids played in the street again. I hosted a barbecue in the fall, nothing fancy, just burgers and music. A dozen families showed up, some still cautious, others grateful. No one brought up the past. They didn't have to. Darden called one last time before closing the investigation. "We're filing final sentencing recommendations next week," he said. 3 of them are taking plea deals, the others are going to trial. "Think it'll stick?" "It'll stick," he said. "This wasn't just fraud, it was structural abuse. They built a system designed to intimidate and extract. And they got caught." I thanked him and hung up. That night, I walked the perimeter of the property. No flags, no signs, no fences, just grass and gravel, the air cool and quiet. I stopped near the back, where the pool lights used to cast a glow along the edge of the trees. Now it was just a dark stretch of lawn. I didn't need lights anymore. This land had been claimed once by paper and threat. Now it stood on truth, and that was enough. The county sent the final paperwork in December. Title confirmed. Boundary lines recorded, all disputes resolved. I filed it in the wooden cabinet beside my workbench, locked it with a key, and turned off the light behind me.